All right, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining us. And here is Elena.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. So, today I'm going to talk about kind of like wrap up some of the topics we haven't fully covered yet in this series. I'm going to talk about mostly hydration and food safety. So, I'm going to share my screen. 1 minute. All right. Yeah. And then we'll do our recipes at the end. So fluid. So for those of you who maybe are going through treatments or have gone through treatments, you're very familiar with fluids being very important, right? And what an appropriate day to be talking about fluids. It is probably the hottest day we've seen so far, so it's definitely feeling pretty appropriate to talk about fluid needs today. So, fluid needs can be just kind of shifted for a variety of reasons, can increase during treatment due to, you might be losing fluids through either nausea, like through vomiting, diarrhea, fevers. You might also be losing it through like sweating if you're exercising or doing things outdoors. And then for other people, it's like just if we're focusing so much on eating, fluid intake can be more challenging. And, if people are dealing with nausea, sometimes it's hard to find the right kind of fluid that's going to work for you. So there's a variety of reasons why fluids become super important and something to really focus in on. So we want to look at the urine as kind of our a guidepost to how we're doing with our hydration. So we want urine to be a straw color. When you start it kind of working towards that apple juice color that sometimes you might see like first thing in the morning when you wake up, if you didn't drink enough like the day before. Um, Definitely trying to get it more towards that lighter color. And, sometimes when we start noticing symptoms of thirst, we're already kind of behind the eight ball. So we want to be proactive and focus on hydrating throughout the day, finding things that work for us. So for people that need a little bit more calories, so say people are having treatments that are affecting their GI tract or affecting like their swallowing through things like mucositis and different issues like that, we can focus in on calorie rich, protein rich liquids. So smoothies, shakes, milk, plant milks, cream soups. So kind of looking at some of those things to help not only meet our calorie needs, but also some of our fluid needs. And then we might want to just figure out what liquid we tolerate the best, right? When people are nauseous, water is not always what they're looking for. So sometimes adding a little bit to that can help. So sometimes people do well with a little bit of citrus added to their water. Some people do well with like some type of a tea bag added to water. I also like these little things are called stir, STUR. I don't know if anybody's heard of those, but they're like a little dropper. They don't have any artificial sweetener. It's just a little bit of stevia and then a little bit of fruit juice to flavor it. And, they're again just something that a tool people can use to increase that fluid intake. So I get a lot of questions about like fluid needs. Really, how much should we be having? Sometimes you see like the kids dragging around like a gallon jug of water with them. You see people with giant water bottles with like lines on them. A lot of times it's a little bit of overkill. Like people don't need quite that much for the most part. But in general, we're going to look to about 9 cups a day for women and about 12 and a half cups a day for men. Now, again, that can vary based on, um, you know, your size, even your outputs. So if you're like, having the vomiting, having the diarrhea, having a fever, sweating during exercise, those needs are going to increase. And nature serves us well for our fluid needs, right? So as we approach these hot months of summer, what comes into season? But these fruits and veggies that have over 90% water. When I lived in Delaware, we had a beautiful peach tree, and you could tell when it was a dry summer because the squirrels would come and they'd take one bite out of each peach. It would drive me crazy. I wish they would just finish a whole peach, but that was how they were getting their fluids. So we can also use these fruits and vegetables to get our fluids in. And it's basically, obviously those melons, you think of watermelon, like how much water, how nice that feels if your mouth is dry and you're thirsty. Berries, peaches, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, celery. And even though it feels outside now, like we should have these growing here locally, we're a little couple weeks away from this still, but still very fresh from like the Carolinas and things. And pretty soon we'll have our own growing. So again, we want to look at that urine color. So, we can also think of it pale lemonade color would be a hydrated color, that straw color we talked about. And then those early signs of dehydration, thirst, premature fatigue, flushed skin, faster pulse rate. So you might notice that. If you're outdoors, it's hot. That's something you want to keep an eye on. Is your heart beating faster than normal? And then some of those later signs, dizziness, increased weakness, labored breathing with exercise, all red flags that we want to pay attention to. When we're exercising, we want to try to drink 20 to 30 ounces of water pre-exercise, like 2 to 3 hours before. And then if we're during an activity, we want to drink 4 ounces every 20 to 30 minutes. And then after, we would recover with some fluids. And some people will like check their weight. Not that I'm thinking, a lot of us aren't doing this level of activity, but even when we're outdoors in this type of weather and we know we're going to be outdoors, hydrating ahead of time can be helpful as well. And then staying on top of it during the day. When we talk about sports beverages, all right, we're looking at, for the most part, water or other types of beverages are enough for us. Now, we might want to consider a sports beverage if we're doing more exercise, more than an hour, or we're in a hot and humid climate, or if we're losing fluids through diarrhea and or vomiting. So having some sort of, option to replace that can be helpful. Now, there's a variety of options out there, right? And they're all over the mark with what they have in them. Some of them drive me crazy. For example, there's a beverage called Prime that all the like kids like. They think it's cool. There's an influencer that developed it. And when I look at Prime, I'm like, no, you're not going to have this because it has almost 100% of what we call preformed vitamin A in it. I don't know why. I'm not sure why there's vitamin A in it, but it doesn't, there's no good reason for it. But that preformed vitamin A, it's a fat soluble vitamin. So we don't clear it as easily. And if you're drinking a lot of it, you can risk, having too much of that vitamin A. So little things like that, some of the sports beverages have a ton of sodium, right? 500 milligrams of sodium, really not what most people need. Um, the actual research on like Gatorade was actually like, they're kind of marketing it now. Like the original Gatorade was made from more natural, food sources or, different components of our food supply. Now it's a little bit more manufactured, but it still has that same breakdown. So it was created to like mimic sweat. And there's others out there that are kind of the same breakdown, but you're going to look for something that has the 14 grams of carbohydrate, 28 milligrams of potassium, and 100 milligrams of sodium per 8 ounces. So just something to keep in mind because, again, these products are all over the place in terms of what they have in them. We're actually going to make a little beverage today that's not like a full It's not this breakdown, but we'll talk a little bit more about why it could be helpful. So some creative tips to boost hydration. We mentioned a few options a little while ago, but we could do sparkling water or infused water for some variety. Eat hydrating snacks, so like the yogurt, the smoothies, the fruits, the veggies. We might set reminders on our phone or use a tracking app. So sometimes we just need those reminders. Um, and don't be afraid of sparkling water because it's just as hydrating as just still water, plain water. And just kind of keeping in mind that it um, helps, sometimes people do well with it if they're having a little bit of nausea. It can kind of help settle things a little bit. So just kind of keep that in mind. It can help us reach our goals. The same thing goes for caffeinated beverages. We can count them as a portion of our hydration needs. They don't count as 0 ounces of fluid. They might not kind of be the same as a glass of water, but they still have some benefit to them. So let's talk about infused water. So we're choosing some type of fruit, either fresh or frozen. Um, and sometimes frozen can be nice because it gives it a little bit. I find that when it thaws out, it even infuses more flavor into the water than fresh does. So, for example, I like a mango pineapple infused water or something like that. That can be a really nice combo. Cucumbers work really well. Um, Herbs work well, a tea bag. So I really like, let me grab it to show you. So I have two things that I really like here. One is the Celestial Seasonings, like fruit sampler. So they're a bunch of zinger teas, they're called. These just popped in a thing of water, actually infuse really nicely into your water and just give it like a nice flavor, a nice color. I'll often bring it to like a party with me, like make like a little mocktail out of it with, some water, a couple tea bags, some frozen fruit, and that can be a really nice thing just to sip on. There's also these. I like these too. These are the Bigelow Botanicals um, cold water infusions. So there's a bunch of different flavors, but again, just something fun to add to the water. When it comes to infused water, we do recommend storing it in the refrigerator, just reducing any risk for like bacteria growth on it. And then drinking it typically within 2 days. And I don't know if you've ever tried the fruit after it infused the flavor out of it, but it's wild how there's zero taste. You still have the fiber if you wanted to eat it, but you're not going to get any flavor from it. All right. So, food safety. I wanted to touch on that specifically. Again, this is a good time of year to talk about food safety. We've all been to questionable picnics where the food is sweaty, it's been out for too long. So, we're going to talk through some of like the food safety tips. So, as you know, like cancer treatment can weaken the immune system. And, if people get an infection from a foodborne illness, it can be more serious. And people don't need one more thing to deal with. So, we're going to talk through some of the ways to help protect yourselves. So, we have some like high risk foods, and then we're going to talk about some other options. So, I'm sorry, it should say raw or undercooked meats, poultry, and seafood. Obviously, instead, we're going to choose thoroughly cooked meats, poultry, and seafood. So those burgers on the grill should be well done. They shouldn't have pink inside. Sometimes even just like checking the internal temperature, become familiar with the thermometer, just to kind of keep that at the right temp. Because especially with ground meat, they tend to have more risk from E. coli than even like a steak because whatever bacteria is on the outside of that, it's getting blended together when they grind it, and then you're not cooking it thoroughly and not potentially not killing that bacteria. So really important to work on cooking that and, making sure that it's all the way through. And then unpasteurized dairy and juices, we want to choose pasteurized. So, for example, apple cider, we want to have pasteurized, not raw apple cider. If we're drinking kombucha, we want it to be pasteurized, not like homemade in somebody's house. So, just being aware of those things specifically during treatments. We don't, raw sprouts can be another like high risk item that you want to stay away from. Deli meats, for eating any deli meats, you should steam them and then you can cool them again, but that helps kill the listeria that might be on that. We want to stay away from like pre-made deli salads, maybe stick with homemade ones. And soft cheeses, again, can carry that listeria risk. So we want to stick to hard cheeses. Obviously, we want to always practice good hand washing. Super important, avoiding cross contamination. So I'm not going to use raw meat on my cutting board and then put veggies on it that I'm going to eat fresh. So keeping those things separate. Keeping an eye on food recalls. So that can be really important. There's a lot of different recalls that are coming out pretty frequently. So just kind of paying attention to that. Um, and then we want to thaw meat and poultry and fish properly. So a lot of people just kind of throw it on the countertop and let it sit there till it thaws. What we want to focus in on is the three safe options of thawing. So either in a refrigerator, in a microwave under or on defrost, or under cool running water in the sink. So we want continuous running water on it. And honestly, those three methods work just fine. If you're in a pinch for time, the defrost setting in the microwave is probably your best bet. If I'm ever doing fish, I typically do like the cool running water in the sink. That's pretty quick because fish is usually like a little smaller and thinner, so it's not as much of an issue. We want to cook to the proper internal temperature again. So, having that thermometer. So, for example, chicken 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And then let's talk about leftovers because leftovers are what can be a little bit of a challenge this time of year, specifically if you're like at a picnic or something. So if you go to a picnic, um, outdoors, and the food was kind of recently put out, I always recommend like eating that first, like being one of the first people to eat. And then when people start eating their second meal 4 hours later, just figure something else out to eat at that point, because that will be past that danger zone. So we want it put away and cold after no more than 2 hours. And if it's 90 degrees or warmer, it should really only be out for an hour. So that's always huge. People sometimes pick things up at parties and potlucks and things like that because of that, because people are touching it. There's the flies. Bacteria just can grow really easily, especially at that high temperature. And then in the refrigerator specifically, you want to avoid that cross contamination that can occur. So we always recommend putting anything raw on the bottom shelf, so that, juice isn't dripping down onto like other things. I really like this app. So you can put this on your phone, but I'm going to take you to the website just to show you a little bit of what it looks like. And if you can just shout out that you can see this, just because I'm popping to a different screen.
I still just see your slides.
Okay. All right, let me get it to this screen. Let me hit stop sharing. And now I'm going to share my screen again. All right, can you see that app open now?
It's taking a second to load, I think. Oh, yep, yep, I see the website now.
Okay, perfect. So this is kind of what your app will look like on your phone. I get a lot of questions on how long can I keep this in the fridge? So I think that this kind of helps to answer some of those questions that people might have. So for example, the grains and pasta, we can kind of look up and let's say rice. So in the pantry, we can keep it a year. Um, Obviously, we're not going to probably store it in the fridge, but let's go back to something that might be prepared. Sorry. Well, at any rate, you can click on, I think it's going to keep showing like weird things if I think it might kick us out. So at any rate, you can kind of go in there and see. Can you see this screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So you can just kind of see different things and how long it can keep. So let's look at egg dishes. So 3 to 4 days from the date of purchase or the date of preparation. So I think that can just be kind of helpful if you're having those questions. All right, let me go back to my slides. Great. And then I just have some different recipe websites for you to check out. So we've talked about Cancer Dietitian before. I really do like that one, AICR, Rebecca Katz's website, and then obviously the Cancer Support Community website that we talked about before. So I'm going to stop sharing and now we can do our recipes. And do we feel like I should hit, can you guys see me larger or are you just seeing that Cancer Support Community Delaware sign?
Oh, my apologies. I will spotlight you.
Okay, I just wasn't sure like how people could see me. Okay, that's probably best. Great. All right, so now we're going to do, you know what, I wanted to grab two things out of my pantry to show you about the barley real quick. All right, so we're making a barley salad. So that's what we're going to play around with first. Um, so I have prepared my barley. I did it in a rice cooker this morning. So what I wanted to show you, so first off, barley, I feel like is like an unsung hero of the grain family. So barley is full of soluble fiber. So even pearled barley itself has like a lot of fiber, even though it's maybe considered a more processed grain. It still has about 5 grams of fiber per half cup of barley. So that's actually really great in terms of a whole grain because like white rice, for example, might have 1 to 2 grams. So the fiber in barley is throughout the grain versus a lot of other whole, mostly in that outer hull or that outer shell, which we would call like the bran. So that's a really cool thing about barley because that soluble fiber that's in here, it goes down to the lower GI tract, undigested, and then it provides fuel for our good bacteria. Now, as far as what it does once it's down there, it helps to create something called a short chain fatty acids. And these short chain fatty acids are really helpful for the lining of our gut, so helping the lining stay intact. And then again, just fueling that good bacteria. So when we focus in on those types of things and building up that good bacteria, things tend to calm down in our gut. So a lot of people have, significant GI problems from different, medications over the years or different, diets that maybe aren't as nutritious, don't have as much fiber. So over time, a lot of people develop bloating and just GI distress. And I always work with people to kind of bring it back to just a calm feeling in the gut, right? That would be a good goal for all of us because we don't, who has time to be dealing with bloating throughout the day if they don't need to be dealing with bloating throughout the day? So, incorporating in things like this can really help build up that good bacteria, calm things down. And for years, forever until recently, this is how people kind of maintained their gut health before people had like probiotics in a pill, right? So, probiotics in a pill can do some things for the body, but what they're not going to do is provide the fuel for that bacteria to flourish. And really, that comes from our food sources. So, we can focus in on getting some of this built up through adding in barley, oats, all sorts of fruits and veggies. So that's why I wanted to hone in on barley today. But I did want to highlight that we can get a barley that is has more of the hull on it. And I honestly don't know why they call it hull less barley. I'm still trying to figure that out. But this is a brand of a little bit more of an intact grain of barley. And per serving, this has 8 grams of fiber. So it's very high in fiber. This I bought on Vitacost, which I love that website. It's just like a regular grocery store website. It's through the Kroger grocery store, but there's no subscription fee. Their website just offers a lot of like organic and different specialty types of things, but good prices, and they always offer good sales. So might be something you want to check out. So, but regular barley you find just at the grocery store in the dried bean aisle for some reason. So that's what we're using today. That's what I made today was the just regular pearl barley. So I made a cup. So we're gonna empty out, it ends up being about 3 cups of cooked roughly, or 2 cups of cooked when you make a cup of barley. So I'm adding that into my container. Now, just take notice in this recipe that you're having 11 grams of fiber per serving. So that's pretty great. And this could be a little bit of a side dish, or it could be like a lunch or something like that. The protein's a little on the low side, but it's going to fill you up with the fiber, and you can work in protein in other areas too. All right, so we have that. I'm actually going to make the dressing real quick. So let's get into that. So we're going to do about a half or a quarter cup of our lemon juice. So I'm just going to squeeze these. For those of you who haven't watched a class of mine before, I had a squeezer at one point that broke. So I've just been doing this ever since. And this actually works really well. So just kind of work along the edge of your, lemon or lime with a fork, and it gets out a lot of the juice. Okay. So we're just going to strain a quarter cup into my measuring container. Great. We'll add that to a little jar. So this is going to be a really nice lemon vinaigrette. And it is fresh and light. We're going to do a tablespoon of olive oil. So any dressing that I make, I usually cut back the oil, I usually cut back the salt, and I cut back the honey, or the sweetener. So just always know, if you find a recipe online or something, you can always reduce it. You can cut back the oil and add a little bit of water just to help with the volume. And that always works well. So I'm just going to have a tablespoon just for a little bit of that olive oil taste. And then we'll do 2 tablespoons of water. Great. And then we're going to do a tablespoon of rice vinegar. So this is always a nice vinegar. It does have a little bit of sugar in it, so it's like a little bit of a sweet taste, but it's not adding much added sugar to the recipe. Great. Then we're going to do a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. We're going to do half a teaspoon of honey. Just enough to give it a little tiny bit of sweetness. And then I'm just going to whisk that around. Great. So let's just finish cutting the rest of our ingredients. I'm just going to add my beans. I had them rinsed and draining in the sink. And we're going to do about a half cup of chopped cucumber. And you could do a little bit more if you wanted a little bit more in there. And then we're going to do about a half cup of chopped pepper. This ends up just being nice and fresh. You can always just put other veggies into it. You can swap if you need gluten-free, because barley is not a gluten-free grain. You could swap it out. Even for like a millet can be a nice option in something like this. Quinoa, um, like the whole oats could work as well if you ever buy those, the oat groats. You can make it more colorful if you want. And we're just going to put our dressing in and give it a little stir. The other thing that happens with grain, well, specifically like starch, when we cook and cool it, is that it develops what we call resistant starch. And then resistant starch is another bonus for our gut health. So it's like a double whammy for gut health with using barley and then cooking and cooling it as well. Great. Okay. So now we are going to do our drink. So we have, I'll pull up my recipe real quick. So we're making an infused coconut water. So I think that this recipe is super fun. Um, it Coconut water is actually really high in potassium. So, I know I talked about potassium in as a rehydration beverage, and you don't need a ton for that. But in general, some people find themselves low in potassium when they're going through treatment. Some medications will deplete potassium a little bit. Um, so it's something that, we can think about. A lot of people are just low in general in potassium in the general population. So our goal is always to have potassium up a little bit and sodium a little bit lower. A lot of times we'll see that flipped, and that does affect our blood pressure when it's flipped and sodium is high and potassium is low. If you've ever heard of the DASH diet, that's a specific diet for hypertension. and it has a ton of fruits and vegetables in it because that's where we're getting most of our potassium from. So it's like 10 servings of fruits and veggies. It's some low fat dairy because dairy also is a good source of potassium. So it's a high focus on those foods. And what that diet does is it brings up potassium and it brings down sodium intake. If you've ever heard of like Mrs. Dash seasoning, now they're just calling it Dash. But again, that's kind of like, I think, derived from that diet in terms of like a sodium free seasoning. So there's only a small segment of the population that needs to restrict potassium, and that's typically people with really end stage kidney disease if they're on dialysis and things like that. So vast majority of people should have more potassium in their diet. And coconut water is kind of a fun way to do it. I will say, kind of by itself, the flavor, it has a specific flavor. If you've ever had coconut water before, you know what I'm talking about. It has like a little hint of some sort of flavor to it. I will say this recipe really helps kind of cut that, which is actually like really refreshing and nice. I will also say that I forgot to pick my mint right before the class, so I apologize. I'm not going to put my mint in here, but you do see it in the picture. And right when I hang up, I'm going to go put it in so I can drink this because it's super yummy. Um, but that really helps kind of like give it a nice flavor. So we're going to do about half of a lime sliced. And again, with our infusion, we don't have to limit it to, just um like water with fruit in it. We can again use like something like this. We could use tea. We could do all sorts of things to make it more exciting. Okay, so I'm gonna put that right in. And then we're gonna do about a quarter cup of sliced cucumber. Again, cucumber can be really nice in infused water. Gives it like a really fresh flavor. Now, as far as potassium goals, most people should be getting at least about 3,500 plus, like 3,500 to 4,500 milligrams per day. I find most people are getting maybe like 2,000, something like that, or a little less even. So that's something definitely to think about, like just trying to get a little bit more in. And as you can know, a serving of this actually has about what did we say? 345 milligrams of potassium. So definitely pretty good. So for this, I did 2 cups of water, and then I'm gonna do 2 cups of coconut water. And then, like I said, I would put about 10 mint leaves in this just to give it a little extra kick. That's really, really nice and flavorful. Wonderful. Does anybody have that wraps our recipes for the day? Does anybody have any questions on any of this? I know I only have one person, but
No, but thank you. I've not tried the coconut water, but I do water with cucumber, lemon, and mint, just that
Great.
plain and stuff. I like it that way. I do go out in my garden, pick the mint and stuff, and then,
Oh,
do
great.
that and stuff. It's good. But
Yeah.
I don't know, I've never tried the coconut water, but I may try it and see,
Yeah.
you
Something
know,
different, right?
add
Just
a little bit more potassium then.
yeah, it just kind of helps mix things up a little bit,
Yeah.
which is always
And the
good.
barley that you used was the pearl barley, or was it the other one? Because I
Yeah,
always get pearl.
I just use the pearled barley, and
Okay,
like I
that's
said,
what I've always gotten. I just
yeah,
didn't know about the other. I mean, I
yeah,
know that they have another kind too.
yeah. And I do love, like I said, that even though it's pearled and a little bit more processed, it has 5 grams of fiber per
Right. So it's
cup,
still,
which is great.
yeah, it's still a good one.
And I find it's a good substitute for rice, like in certain things, like a stir fry, I think,
Hmm.
as well, or like a soup.
Yes,
Obviously most
soup
people
is
are
what
familiar with it in
that's what I've
soup.
always used it for. I've never used it in a salad, but I was like, oh, I could see that salad would be good.
I almost feel like it's like, sometimes you see salads like this with rice, and I always feel like rice gets a little like grainy, like
Yeah,
when it's cold. This I
yeah.
feel like holds its texture a
I
lot.
think this holds it better.
It
This
does.
will hold up better. And what, it was white beans you used in it?
Yeah, I just use the cannellini
Okay.
beans, but you
Yeah.
could use any, whatever beans you like.
Right.
Um, Definitely works out well.
Okay, good. And you
Yeah,
didn't add any salt or pepper to it, right? Nothing.
I did not. No,
No.
really the only like salt that's coming from that would be from the Dijon because the
Okay.
Dijon does have
Okay.
some salt in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
But yeah, no
that
need to add salt. Yeah, so that's another thing. Like, we can always adjust dressings and stuff to
right.
have less of.
Yeah. And what a healthy dressing it is though, because
Yeah.
there's no preservatives in it. It's like, yeah, it's pretty clean. And you could use that on any salad, really, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it can be nice just to kind of keep some dressing and the, homemade dressing.
hmm
There's so many simple
yeah,
ways to create
yeah, it is.
dressing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the series. It was really good.
Oh, good. Thank you for joining. And
Yeah.
then I do like the monthly class still. I don't know
Right.
if you,
Yep,
yeah.
I do that sometimes too. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so it was good. All
I'm
right
on
then.
like 2 Mondays or a week and a half, basically.
Yeah, it'll
Mhm.
okay, so it'll be like the end of June then. It'll be another class. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because those are usually like 4:30 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like right in the middle of getting my dinner ready at that time. So sometimes it
Yeah.
depends. It's like, sometimes I can do it, or I just check this, I'll check the slideshow and stuff. I'll do it and stuff that way. So
Oh,
good, good.
wonderful.
I'm glad that I came then.
Yeah, I did want to correct my analysis on the coconut water recipe. It doesn't have any fat in it. I don't know what just
Okay.
so the group on Facebook is aware.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
0 grams of fat. I have like an 8 and a slash and a 0. I was obviously rushing through it and messing.
Okay. No. No, but I mean, I do. Sometimes I'll do like strawberry, cucumber water
Oh
or
yeah.
watermelon and cucumber. I like cucumbers, so I try to put it in a lot of stuff.
Just mixing it up can be nice.
Mixing it up, just making it different. I mean, I always, in the winter, you always just put lemon. I'll squeeze the
Mhm.
lemon in the water and stuff, or a lime. But in the summer, there's so many other things,
Definitely.
that you can
Like the
get.
frozen stuff. Like I said, the frozen
Yeah.
stuff can be really nice too.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you put the strawberry in that water, like I had that yesterday, it like becomes white. It
I
like
know,
the
right?
strawberry just
So
loses
fast.
all of its color.
Yeah. And it also pulls out, some of that vitamin C too, because that's a water soluble
Yes.
vitamin. So,
Yeah.
you get some good benefits from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the strawberries I had were local and they were like red all the way through. It was like, and then I looked at it, I was like, wow, there's no color left to that. It all went in my water,
That's great. It's
which
perfect.
is always good. Like anything
Mhm.
you can get local is better and stuff.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's what I like. All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You as well. Thanks.
Thanks.
Kate.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. All
Yep. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a good
right.
night.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you. Take care.